Hello, Gene from Suntour. You have a freeze dryer. You can't reach base pressure. You can't start your cycle. No, it's probably not your vacuum pump. You very likely have a vacuum leak. Let's talk about it. So, how do you tell if you have a leak? Simple. Just pull vacuum on your chamber while it's still clean and dry and empty, and then isolate your vacuum pump and measure how fast it takes or how fast pressure rises in your chamber. In fact, you can just kind of look at it often and see how fast pressure is rising to get a feel for what size vacuum leak you have. Newsflash, you always have some level of vacuum leak. Even the most leak tight chamber on the planet has some small amounts of leaks. What you're really interested in when you're operating a freeze dryer is my leak small enough that my pump can easily overcome that leak? If the leak starts to get to the point where it's getting too close to your operating set points, then you need to start taking action on a leak. Okay, so there's several places where you should think about as the most likely places of leaks in your chamber right off the bat. Number one, mechanical connections to your system. So anything that has a connection, whether it be a O-ring and a clamp, or a hose and a hose clamp with a hose barb, these are all mechanical connections. This includes where your gauge is sensing. This includes where your drain line is, your pump line, if you have a separate vent line, all those kinds of places, right? These are mechanical connections. Very likely place for a leak. It's highly suspect. This is one of the most likely places. Two, maybe even more likely as a place for your leak is electrical feed-throughs. So electrical feed-throughs are necessary in a freeze dryer because you have to get heat into the chamber, and you also have sensors in there that are measuring the temperature of your shelves or perhaps your probes. You will have electrical feed-throughs. So they are susceptible to leaks because as you exercise the chamber, right, you warm it up and cool it down, warm it up and cool it down, you're going to actually create some movement in those materials. And because the connectors where those electrical feed-throughs are going through have dissimilar materials, they're going to expand and shrink at different rates depending on temperature. So when that happens, you start to get holes or cracks and crevices that open up. That's where the leaks come in. So electrical feed-throughs, probably your second most likely place for a vacuum leak. And then there's the chamber door. Now, most people check the chamber door right away as one of their most likely places for a leak. And I'm going to guess that 90% of you out there did not find your leak at the chamber door. It's still a good place to check. Absolutely. Now remember, your chamber door is going to fit against the face of the chamber in one way or another, whether that's the edge of a cylinder or a flange of some type. You're going to have some kind of elastomer that goes between those two, some kind of gasket or O-ring. That's something that you need to check. Take that O-ring out, take that gasket out, clean it, make sure all the metal surfaces that it touches are clean, inspect it for cracks, and then put it back on. If you had a leak on your chamber door, that may just fix it. However, sometimes chamber doors warp over time. If you can see whether or not your chamber door is actually connecting with the elastomer, maybe you smear some grease on the elastomer and then shut the door as tight as it normally is, and then open it up and see if there's a nice even ring around that door. If there is, it's probably not going to be that's where your leak is. But we'll talk a little bit later on here about how to actually find a leak in your chamber, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, if this is the first time that you've joined my channel, it's a brand new channel, so naturally it might be the first time. Do me a favor, I really need to start promoting the channel so people can see these videos. I'm putting out a lot of important content here for people to help people actually move maybe from very small operations and freeze drying to maybe more commercial size operations, or even help you understand why your home unit is not operating the way you think it should. So again, just hit the like and subscribe buttons. It's very simple for you to do, costs you nothing, but it can actually mean quite a bit to me. And thank you for doing that. Okay, So now let's talk about the first place that you might find a vacuum leak, and this is your mechanical feed-throughs. Well, actually, let's just talk about all of them. Let's talk about a really easy way and very cheap, I might add, way to see if you have a vacuum leak there. So pump your chamber down to its lowest pressure that you can achieve, and then get let's say an eyedropper or a little squirt bottle, and with some kind of volatile liquid like acetone or denatured ethanol. Something that's pure though. You don't want to have something that's a certain percentage of alcohol like what you would get at Walmart. It needs to be pure. So, and then just take that eyedropper and drip onto a suspect location and then wait for a little while, 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and see if pressure spikes inside your chamber. You can monitor pressure right on the panel. Depending on where your pressure is indicated, just monitor pressure. If you have a big commercial system, you might need to have somebody else monitor your pressure while you do this. Why does it cause a pressure spike? Because it's leaking in as a liquid, and then it flashes to vapor. And vapor generally occupies, between 20 and 100 times more volume than liquid does. So that's what causes a pressure spike. It can even be a much larger ratio because when you're at vacuum, at 1 millibar, it takes 1,000 times more, the same amount of liquid would occupy 1,000 times more volume because you're at 1,000th of an atmosphere. So this is actually a really effective way. I've actually helped quite a number of commercial freeze dryers find leaks in their system using this really old world. You might call it a hack method, but it's actually not so hack. It's actually really quite effective. If you have a big commercial freeze dryer and you have a vexing leak, you might need to get a helium leak detector. There are very few methods to identify the location of a leak in a vacuum system that's running at a rarefied atmosphere like a 1 millibar, which is pretty close to 1 torr, by the way, which is 1,000 millitorr for those of you who are reading your gauge in millitorr, which means that if you have a leak and the acetone or ethanol method doesn't work, you might need to invest in having somebody come out with a helium leak detector and test your system for that. You're not going to do that if you have a little home unit because frankly, having that service come out to your home and find a leak in your freeze dryer would probably cost more than the freeze dryer did to begin with. Okay, under what circumstances can it look like you have a leak when you don't actually have a leak? Well, that's outgassing. Now, what is outgassing? It's where something is actually vaporizing inside your chamber that you weren't expecting to vaporize inside your chamber. Most likely this is going to be water, right? You didn't get your chamber dry and the surfaces of your chamber can absorb heat from the environment. So when you draw a vacuum, that liquid water or other types of substances will then vaporize under vacuum and it'll create pressure in your chamber, making it hard for your pump to pump out that gas because the gas is continually being generated while you're pumping it out. If you don't cool your chamber down properly before you pump your chamber down, this can be a real problem because water that's in your drain line, for example, or somewhere else in your system in the cracks and crevices, anything that vaporizes will then need to be handled by your vacuum pump, and your vacuum pump's pumping speed as compared to the cold surface in your chamber for water vapor is just a teeny tiny fraction. It's probably 100,000 times less effective at pumping out water vapor than that cold surface on the inside of your chamber or on those condenser plates that you have along the sides or in the back of your chamber. So make sure your refrigeration system is on and your chamber is nice and cold before you try to do a vacuum leak check. It will take water vapor and outgassing out of the equation, generally speaking, as a false positive on a vacuum leak check. If you want more information about how to tell the difference between outgassing and a vacuum leak in systems in general, you will probably find an article on my website. If you troll around it a little bit enough and look into the knowledge side of the website, you'll find an article that's all about how to tell the difference using charts, how you graph pressure versus time. It'll generate some charts, and you can easily tell whether or not you have a vacuum leak or you have outgassing or some combination, which is usually the case. Okay, let's say that you have a vacuum leak. You've identified that you do. You even know where. What do you do about it? Well, if it's in your chamber door and it's not easy to fix, you may need to think about either replacing the door or the elastomers or something like that. In most cases where you have vacuum leaks that are in the chamber, maybe the connections, remember the electrical feed-throughs or the mechanical connections, you can often seal those up with some kind of fluid that you apply to the outside of the chamber. Well, why do I say that? Well, because the vacuum is drawing stuff into the chamber. The crack that it's going through has to be very small by definition, or your vacuum leak would be very serious. So simply put something like silicone caulking on the outside of your chamber where you found the leak, and that should plug it up at least pretty well for actually quite some time. You can use other substances too, like epoxy or something like that. Just be aware that a flexible sealant is going to last longer and be more resistant to the expansion, contraction, crack propagation problem that probably led to the leak in the first place. So something like silicone caulking is actually quite a nice option. And it's very cheap. You can get it anywhere. Just be aware that silicone caulking does have a lot of acetic, some kind of acetates. When you open up the silicone caulking, it's got that really sharp vinegary smell. Yeah, it means that it's got some kind of acetic acid or acetates or whatever in it, which is part of acetone. So just be aware that those smells might get into your chamber and accumulate on the ice for maybe your first run or whatever. But overall, it's not going to be a big problem. Once that silicone caulking is cured, it becomes a polymer that's no longer volatile under normal vacuum conditions, and you don't have to worry about it from there on. And the fact is that it was just plugging a little tiny leak anyway, so the very, very, very small surface area is actually exposed to the vacuum by that point. In a nutshell, there you have it. So vacuum leaks can stop you from operating your process. So if, for example, you have a leak that gives you a minimum base pressure that you can get to, say, 400 millitorr, and your pressure limit that you're trying to operate under in your chamber is 500 millitorr, that means that you're so close to your limit that as soon as you turn on your heaters, your pressure is going to go over, and then the heaters go off. If you're in a pressure control philosophy, like almost every home small-based unit is, the pressure in the chamber will actually control the power to the heaters. So if you go over the pressure of the pressure limit, then the heaters automatically turn off and turn on in order to try to maintain the chamber at that pressure or lower. So your product will still dry. It'll just take 3 days, 5 days instead of the normal 1 day. So it's actually quite an interesting or important thing for you to tackle. If you're in commercial production, time is money. Losing time on your production cycle, that is a killer. So you need to address these problems as soon as possible. The thing you should really always try to determine is every once in a while, check your chamber for vacuum leaks, particularly if you start to see an erosion of the performance of your system, meaning it takes longer for you to get your process cycle done than it did before. Vacuum leak might be one of the reasons why that is happening. There's other reasons, of course, that it could be happening as well. For example, degradation of your refrigeration system. We'll talk about that in a different episode altogether. But once you find leaks, you can seal them up, and then you should be able to operate pretty much at normal until you develop some other problem. Okay, and the fact is, problems happen in freeze drying. That's kind of what I'm here to do, is help you navigate some of those problems. And also, I'll be here to help you with issues like developing product recipes or how to optimize your cycle to give you top quality while making it as short as possible. Maybe even think about what kind of products. We'll talk maybe about packaging and other things that deal with the business of freeze drying. Those are all things that I will be making videos on in the future. Of course, you're probably looking at my number 3 or 4 video that I've made so far. so it's still early doors. But again, if you haven't already done so, please give me a like, subscribe to my channel, which just helps promote my videos to other people. And until then, happy freeze drying.